Spending some time with us.
Yeah, no problem, man.
We're here with Peter Karl, Director of Rivals. So I've just got a few questions for you. When working on Rivals, did you ever have to tone down someone's fandom for a scene to work? I saw some of the like big moments from people like Rich and from J.K. Simmons especially. But as a football fan myself, I can understand how riled up some fans can get when talking about the history of their team.
Um, Good question, man. Yes. Well, not so much rile them down, but cut them out or cut out the parts that I loved when people were answering some questions very enthusiastically, particularly one of the Ohio State fans. He's like interviewed outside the stadium. He had some just golden lines that just were not safe for television. But those will be forever repeated between myself, my producer, and the guy who edited it. That will just live on forever. But maybe they'll make the director's cut one day.
I love that. I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
When mixing comedy in with telling the audience facts about the two teams, sometimes things can get lost in the weeds. But with Rivals, the comedy really helps the audience understand some of the things that can get complicated at times. How did your crew come up with the conclusion that you wanted to marry your explanations of things with comedy,
Mhm.
especially there at the beginning?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, the approach of looking at a sports rivalry through a scientific lens, sports can sometimes be taken a little bit too seriously. They are, important, um, but then science itself it can naturally be quite dense. So instantly we were like, look, if this is going to be entertaining, it has to be have a funny bone. And so to help distill some of these really complex concepts around sports and rivalry and psychology, like we just knew it had to have some humor in it. So we wanted to have some fun with it and not take it overly serious. That even though the content in and of itself was pretty serious, so um, that was definitely the goal. Is to try to set the tone early with a little bit of humor and tongue in cheek, and I'm glad that you picked that up because that was the intent.
The some of the J.K. Simmons, Rich Eisen back and forth was some of the funniest things that I've seen in a sports doc. It doesn't feel like a documentary. It feels like you're watching a TV show or something. So
Oh, that's awesome, man. I'm glad to hear that because, that was had to be done, hey, Rich, we're gonna have JK voice this. If you have anything to say to him, like, we didn't have it written really, and then once Rich did that, when we went to go film the voiceover with JK, we did show him a bit of it, I'm like, hey, can we have you interrupt him here? And JK is such a good sport, had a lot of fun with it. Obviously, he's on his show often around the time of
Mhm.
the game, so they have some like history and some banter, and it just worked out awesome. And so, yeah, I'm glad we got that in there.
I love that.
Yeah,
As a Miami Dolphins fan myself, we hear a lot about Michigan because our owner, we've had players like
right.
Chad Henne and Ted Ginn Jr., who you talked about for a little bit
Mhm.
in Rivals. How did you go about choosing who you wanted to focus on with the long list of superstars that have come out of those two schools?
Right. Yeah, definitely a tough task, and there's so many that got left out, Part of it is who gets mentioned in interviews, like that's just naturally what comes from the interviewees. The other part was like, who had performances or a history or played a role in the rivalry that fit what we were talking about, for example, like the whole section on how rivalry elicits enhanced performance, right? Like from a psychological and physiological standpoint, like why do we get these incredible performances in rivalry games? To highlight guys like Tim Biakabatuka from who that name is always synonymous with running for 313 yards against Ohio State. Like that guy basically made himself a first round pick, I think, because of that game. And then you have uh, the guy from I'm blanking on it. JT Barrett. JT Barrett's
Mhm.
quarterbacking performances against Michigan were just legendary. Like the dude just stepped up. And then Tom Brady, who no one even knew about, you know, he had one of his comebacks against Ohio State. So it felt necessary to kind of make sure those tied in together. And Dwayne Haskins as well, who the late Dwayne Haskins, he had one of his best performances ever as a football player against Michigan. So There are many, 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 many guys, but I wish we could have got them all in there. But those ones felt most appropriate.
And looking at some of the projects that you've worked on previously, you've worked with American football, and you've worked
Mhm.
with now, professional sports and all that kind of stuff. Is there a specific sport that you just, I want to do table tennis? Is there something like that that's on your bucket list of, I want to do a project surrounding this
Yeah.
sport?
Pickleball. No, no, and that's what everyone's talking about these days. Um, and, and Ken Solomon would want me to do that. The Tennis Channel. So no, I'm a huge soccer fan. I love soccer. American football is the first film I made was a travel documentary toward the World Cup in 2014 in Brazil. But I think you can learn a lot about the world and culture through soccer, and I think even this series, as it goes on, should include some soccer episodes, if not just one about different soccer rivalries, and they're kind of all in one episode, something like that. So that's kind of my jam, I guess you could say. I really am a nerd about it. But this was a really refreshing, like, return or like look at college football, which I think actually holds a lot of similarities to the passion and the pageantry around a sport as like soccer does.
Truly, truly.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you so much, and I appreciate the time you've given us.
No, man.
Rivals is a lot of fun.
Appreciate your interest. Thank you so much.
Thank you.